Good afternoon, everyone. We'll wait about another minute or two to let a few additional people pop in, and then we'll go ahead and get right into it. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Dorian Hall. I'm the Associate Director. I'm sorry, that's my old position. I'm the Director of the Millennium Student Center and Event Services. In my current role, I'm also responsible for oversight of the Office of Student Involvement. This presentation that I have for you today was actually a presentation that was developed by Dr. Ashley Roberts, who was the Associate Director of the Office of Student Involvement before she departed the university this summer to take a new position at Stockton University. And as someone who was a student leader in my undergrad days, as well as someone who's weathered multiple transitions of staff in and out through my time as an employee at the university, I felt best suited to take this presentation and offer it to the students, because this is, again, something that's very key and very important to long-term success of organizations. I have found that many organizations struggle year over year because they don't transition well. And transitioning successfully can make all the difference in building on the momentum that the previous year team developed. So this presentation, I don't believe, is going to last us very long. We certainly won't go the full 50 minutes. If there's any questions at any time, please put those questions into the chat. I have one of my colleagues, Lester Stewart, who is the Associate Director of Operations and Event Services. So he's going to be monitoring the chat, and he will stop me and ask any of those questions that pop up in the chat directly so that everyone can hear them, but then also I'll be able to respond to those questions. If time permits and you have some questions in relation to some other things in regards to student involvement, the Millennium Student Center, or event services, I'll certainly entertain those specific questions relating to those areas near the end of this presentation. But again, any questions that you have relevant to the topic, you can ask those at any time. So we'll again go ahead and get started. So one of the first things that's very important with transitioning organization is records. There are so many different forms of records that an organization should be keeping track of and should have in some form or fashion. The first and probably one of the most important records is the Constitution. The Constitution is a requirement of student involvement for your organization to have a Constitution and to maintain a current copy of that on file year after year. And within that Constitution, typically the mission statement of the organization, why this organization exists in the first place, should be present within that Constitution somewhere. Just kind of on a slight tangent with mission, as an organization, you were formed for a purpose, and your mission is that purpose. And so every single thing that you do as an organization should focus in on that purpose, focus in on that mission. You should never do anything that muddles or dilutes what your core mission is. Even if the thing that you want to do is a good thing, if it doesn't speak to the mission of why you exist and the constituents as an organization that you're here to serve, then you really should not do whatever that task is. So it's important also, as you're transitioning, to really gain a clear understanding of your mission as an organization. The Constitution, kind of backtracking a moment, also gives you guidance on how you should operate as an organization, how decisions are made. So it's also very important to understand and know your Constitution as well. And over time, constitutions and missions become dated or may not be relevant to how the organization needs to move forward. So it's very important to update that as time progresses and as things change for the organization. I was a member of the Associated Black Collegians in my undergrad years, and ABC is one of the longest existing organizations on campus. And I can guarantee you that the mission of ABC in 1968, when it was founded, is definitely different, although similar, definitely different than what it is now in 2020. So again, it's important to make sure that you are familiar with the Constitution, familiar with the mission, and are updating it if it's no longer relevant. Another important thing is your meeting minutes. As an organization, you should be taking minutes of all of your meetings, taking notes of all of your meetings, from if there's officer meetings, if there are meeting minutes for general membership, if there are meetings that you're having with other organizations, if there's meetings that you're having really in any form or fashion that the organization might operate, to have meetings, it is really important to keep minutes. Because those minutes create a historical record of what this organization has been doing, what this organization hopes to do. And so those are key things for new leaders to be aware of. What has ABC, I'm going to use ABC as an example, because again, I was a member of ABC. What has ABC been doing for the last 5 years? What has ABC wanted to do, but maybe was not able to do because time didn't allow for it or resources didn't allow for it? What are things that ABC wants to do, but maybe this board, current leadership, doesn't have the capacity to do it? So that's really why it's so important to have that information, to make sure that you're taking minutes, because that's really going to help the organization flourish and grow, and then be able to continue the momentum that was started by a previous board that may need to continue in future boards. Event forms. So particularly because I am responsible for the Millennium Student Center and have been part of the Millennium Student Center for over a decade at this point now, there is so much information that can be found about how events happened, what events happened, the cost of an event, other details related to events, by having records of confirmations, having records of any other forms relevant to those events. And it can be really, really helpful to an organization as they're seeking to continue certain events, but even if they're trying to decide how to maybe tweak an event or make an event better or different to suit the needs of an organization as that organization changes, as that organization grows. There are some events also that may be deemed no longer necessary or needed because their purpose was very relevant in that moment, but again, as things change, maybe it doesn't make sense to continue to host this particular event because the needs of students and the concerns of students have changed over time. Another thing, and this may not be as relevant now, but certainly in the past, the current would often have a lot more publications that they used to offer out than what they may be able to do now, just as print media has changed. It's no slight to the organization, but print media is not as relevant as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But it can be very helpful to look back into old articles and information that the current has presented in the past, because that can give you information on the history of your organization. What events did the organization maybe have held in the past? What relevant events in the past that your organization had a voice in? Those things can be found often through looking at old current articles and old information found in the current. And in a similar way, the UMSL archives. It's a resource that student involvement has tapped into multiple times to get historical information on what has happened with student involvement over the years, student government and other organizations, University Program Board through the years. And so tapping into the current and tapping into those archives are great ways to get that historical information, especially if you really want to do something to honor the history and the legacy of your organization and its previous members and alumni. MyEngage is a tool that we have talked about multiple times throughout this day already, but it is also helpful to look again for that historical reference. We've been using MyEngage for about 1.5 years now, and we're going to continue to use MyEngage. And there's again some good information there that can be helpful as a leader. So I would definitely recommend that you become familiar with MyEngage, but also that you're using MyEngage to keep your rosters up to date, to keep your officers up to date, beyond just the ones that are required by student involvement, to communicate back and forth with your membership and between your leadership of your organization, to also just post information about the events and activities that you're doing. Because as an office, we're going to direct anyone that's interested in your organizations to MyEngage. So the more that you keep things current and relevant in MyEngage, the better it is for the organization, because that's going to be one of the number one places that our team sends prospective students, faculty, staff, anyone that may be interested in your organization. And the last thing that kind of with records that I wanted to reference is Google Drive. We have the ability with our access to several Google products to create shared drives for student organizations. And so again, using Associated Black Legions, ABC as an example, ABC has a shared drive that has tons of information from previous years, tons of information on the minutes, those forms, a lot of the stuff that I've mentioned before. ABC keeps those things in the Google Drive. So it's important to save things in a central location, and a Google Drive is one of the best places to do that because it's very easy to transition between one group of leaders and another. I also would highly recommend that you have your advisor listed on there, again, because advisors are more than likely going to stick with their organization over multiple years, whereas officers may change every single year. And so this is, again, a good resource to share documents, to save documents, and to make sure that everything that has been happening with your organization is saved in one central location that can be accessed by anyone that may need to access that information. Another thing that's important is your advisor. How active is your advisor? We have found over the years that some advisors just kind of take the role and are there when the student organizations may need them, but aren't maybe very, very active. But then there are others who are very much helping lead and guide their student organizations that they advise. And so it's very important that you tap into your advisor no matter what level of support that they're offering. Understand for really the vast majority of advisors on this campus that there's no additional compensation, there's nothing that they're receiving from the university, that there is truly a volunteer role. And so respect their boundaries, respect what they are able to contribute, but also understand that if you need an advisor that may be able to offer more support to the organization, to have those frank conversations with your current advisor, because maybe they haven't been as involved because that wasn't what previous exec boards maybe needed from them. But again, an advisor can be really, really helpful because they may hold a lot of history with that organization. And they can also be very key in helping with those transitions. At one point, I was advising the Black Business Student Association, and it was very helpful for me to have known some of the history of the organization because, again, I was a part of the organization in undergrad, so that helps them understand where the organization came from and some of the challenges that the organization faced and help them guide through those challenges. So those advisors, again, can be really, really key in helping the organization year over year. Another great resource is the Office of Student Involvement. There's a number of resources here, and there's others, of course, that are available. One, the handbook that the Office of Student Involvement maintains. There's a lot of information on how to manage your organization and policies and procedures in relation to those organizations that can be found in the handbook, which is on the Student Involvement website. Excuse me. Also, there's access to past constitutions and past rosters, past information that Student Involvement has access to that can, again, be very helpful. Even in connecting potentially the organization with former leaders in the organization that may have gone on to do other things, but may still be on campus, or in some cases, even connecting you with alumni from those organizations as well. Again, also having access to just other historical knowledge and documents and information about the organization. Student Involvement has done its best to maintain records of those organizations over the years, and there may be some information there that can help guide and direct the organization as it proceeds forward. Graphic design files. We have a graphic design team within the Office of Student Involvement. It is Katie Gertler, who is our current senior media producer, and then she has a team of student employees that work with her. And we keep tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of graphic design files over the years. And so that can, again, also be helpful to get information on what was the brand that the organization may have been crafting in certain years, and maybe how to continue that brand, or maybe how to tweak that brand, again, based on what has been done in the past for the organization. But then also just getting access to those actual files, if maybe to recreate some things that have been done, some events or ideas that have been done in the past. And so again, tapping into those different things. But then also there's the fiscal records, the what has this organization spent in past years for certain events, what was allocated. I know some of the allocation processes have changed over the years, and so some things are different, of course, than what they have been in previous years, but those historical financial records can also be very, very key in understanding how you may even want to go about making a SABC, a Student Activities Budget Committee, a request to them for funds for an upcoming event. So again, all of those things can be found through the Office of Student Involvement. Engaging in, again, current members. Sometimes with organizations, and this has been somewhat of the experience with ABC, with so many of the officers from the previous year having either graduated or have moved on into other roles outside of ABC, sometimes connecting with that current membership, because there's a lot of information that they may have. They can also potentially be future leaders of your organization if you take the time to develop them, engage them, and help mold and craft them into the leaders of tomorrow. I think that's one of the other things that a lot of organizations struggle with when it comes to transitions, is identifying people who are part of the membership today that could really be the leaders of this organization tomorrow. Particularly if you are a senior expecting to graduate sometime this year, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you find someone in your membership that you can help mold and craft to be an officer or a highly engaged member of this organization after you have graduated. Because that is also one of the biggest things that I see officers, particularly seniors, not doing very well, is finding someone that can succeed them when their time is up. And sometimes it can be very difficult to find that, especially as a senior, because I'll be very honest, senioritis is very real. A lot of students in their last year experience senioritis. And so it can be very difficult to have the motivation sometimes even to connect with some of the members and really try to get them engaged at a level where they're going to continue the organization. But in doing so, you also really help reduce that learning curve year over year. And that learning curve can be very steep, especially if your organization is a very active one and has a strong reputation across the campus. So again, it is very important that you engage and connect with those members. It also, again, helps retain that information, retain that knowledge year over year. And then again, a couple tips on sort of how to bow out gracefully, and I'll be wrapping it up in a few moments. So again, I said this wasn't going to be a very long session, and I was very honest about that. Communicate your intentions with your transition. Be very honest, be very open. Be honest about what you can contribute. Be honest about your timeline as you're transitioning out. Be honest about what you can assist them with after you have left the role that you're in. If you're able to continue to connect with them over that summer as you're transitioning in some way, that can be very helpful and very beneficial. But if you maybe know that you don't have the capacity or the timing to do so, then again, being very honest about those things, because it really can help the organization craft a plan that will help them as they're preparing for that next year. Think about little ways that you can create cheat sheets or daily tips or things that you just have learned over your time. You know, when you're in a position, in a leadership role, there are things that you're exposed to. There's things that you learn. There's things that challenges that you face that you may have had no idea that you were going to face. But if you can prepare the next group for those challenges, for those hardships, it'll make their experience all the better. And also be willing to help host a transition meeting or some type of retreat with the new officers, even though you may not be continuing at the university. Maybe you have, again, graduated. Trying to dedicate some time over that summer with them to help them really understand their roles, because nobody understands the role better than someone who had just served in that role. I mean, even advisors often are not as familiar with the nuances of being a president or being a treasurer or being an SGA rep or a vice president or some of the other roles that our student organizations have than the person that just left that role or someone who very recently had held that role. So what can you do to facilitate a transition meeting or a retreat rather than relying on the incoming officers to do that and reach back out to you? What initiative can you take in crafting that message, crafting those meetings, those retreats, so that way they get the best from you in order to continue to successfully succeed in leading and managing that organization. Okay. So this really takes me to the end of my presentation. Really at this time, I want to open it up for any questions that anyone may have about transitioning their organization, transitioning leadership, transitioning officers, but also I want to open it up for any questions that you might have about the Millennium Student Center, about event services, or about the Office of Student Involvement as it relates to your roles as student leaders. And you can put those questions in the chat. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Dorian, I have a question. You mentioned about the fiscal records being available through the Office of Student Involvement. Is that something that needs to take place through like an official email request, or is that available online?
So it depends. So for any of your financial records for the current year, you should be able to find that in My Engage. And Rainer had a session this morning where he talked a little bit about that. But then also in his session this afternoon, there's going to be more information about that. And we are going to do our best to make these presentations and all that available to everyone. But also, if you have further questions about it, you can contact Rainer Gall directly, or you can contact the Student Activities Budget Committee, and they can walk through um, how to access that information of your current year's budget. For previous years, again, the best person to contact would be Rainer Gall, because that information is not available in My Engage for previous years. He could get that information and share that with you when he returns from his paternity leave. So in lieu of Rainer, you can contact Mindy Dilly, and she has that information. Mindy's email address is, I'll actually go ahead and just put that in the chat, both their email addresses. Are there any other questions, thoughts, or concerns?
Yeah, me again. Same. I'm gonna have another one. If I want to ask your thoughts. What would you say are the top resources or supports available to organizations through the Office of Student Involvement?
Say your number one resource really and truly is Rainer. Rainer is the coordinator for student organizations, and so he is familiar with all of the processes, all of the procedures. He's familiar with the budgets. He can connect you to other resources that organizations may need. So Rainer is probably the top resource that you have as student leaders within the Office of Student Involvement. I would say, just from a secondary point, because the Millennium Student Center and the Office of Student Involvement have, in some sense, merged, having access to the really the whole team in the Millennium Student Center when it comes to events and event management. I think that's also a really, really great resource that is available to student organizations. So understanding how to host an event on campus, understanding the risk that sometimes is involved with hosting an event, connecting you to campus resources when you're wanting to host an event. And that would even include in digital formats as well. I think that's really, really helpful to have both of those teams working and connected together in a way where they were very much two separate teams for a very long time. So I think that's another one of the key things that are available to you. And then I would say number three within our office is we also have, again, access to a lot of documents and information and just our knowledge that we have collected over the years. I think you really have a lot of great resources in the people more than anything else that make up the Millennium Student Center and the Office of Student Involvement teams. So if there's a question, and I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, but I believe it's Shams. Do you think next semester will be more able to host events in person, or is it just too early to tell right now? If I'm being very, very honest, I do believe that it is still a bit too early to tell without a clear timeline on when vaccines may be available, with so many places across the world, and particularly in the US, that are still seeing cases increase and cases spiking. It is very difficult to understand or know exactly when we'll be able to do more things face-to-face and in person. My 2 cents on it, and again, I want to be very honest, this is just my take. I think that probably in the earlier part of the semester, we'll probably be in a similar situation to what we are now. But I think the campus is optimistic that things could be better as we get into the spring or summer. But again, that's just my 2 cents on everything that's going on. Officially, it's really just too early to know. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, if there are no other comments or concerns, again, my name is Dorian Hall. I'm the Director of Millennium Student Center Event Services. I can be reached at halldc@umsl.edu, or you can contact me from my office phone, which is extension 5573. Please make sure that you complete the form, the attendance form. Lester has put it in the chat above, but there's also the link there in my presentation. We want to thank all of you for your participation in SOL today. And if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact me or someone, for my offices, because we definitely want to make sure that we're here to help and support in any and every way that we